Hi, in this video, we will learn on how to configure the Zookeeper Cluster Manager, set up a monitoring tool, and connect Martini in a clustered setup. A clustered setup for Martini involves having multiple servers clustered together in a group so that Martini's workload can shift from server to server to ensure maximum uptime and reliability. First, make sure you have installed the correct JDK version for the Zookeeper and Martini. JDK version 8. Next, in order to set up Zookeeper in clustered mode, we need to add the correct local host or IP address for each server that needs to be included in the cluster and ports 288 and 388. This can be accessed in the Zookeeper config file. Add the correct entries and then save. Next, we need to add the MyID file of each node. It should be unique to every node in the cluster. This determines how the cluster will elect a new leader when the current one is offline. Add the ID and then save. Next, we need to edit the default HTTP port of the application properties for the Martini, because port 8080 is also used by Zookeeper, which results in port issues between the two. In this video, we've used port 8090 and then save. Next, we need to add the correct IP addresses of each node and port in the Prometheus YAML file. Port 9100 is used, or port 9100 is used by the node exporter service. Make sure you have installed the latest stable version for Prometheus and Node Exporter. Node Exporter scrapes the metrics on their respective node, which can be viewed using Prometheus, which is a monitoring tool for Zookeeper. Add the correct IP addresses and port, then save. Don't forget to add the ports used by the Zookeeper, Martini, and Prometheus to avoid any network issues. And for best practices, make sure to install the latest stable version for Zookeeper, Node Exporter, Prometheus, and Martini Server Runtime. And also make sure to run them as a service to start them automatically upon boot up. Make sure that you also do these exact same steps with the other servers in the cluster, from adding the IP addresses and ports in the Zookeeper config, in editing the Martini HTTP port number, and opening these ports in the firewall. After everything is configured, we can check the Zookeeper status from each node. This node will be a follower. And also a follower. And finally, the cluster leader. Now let's open the Martini admin UI which can be accessed from the IP address of the server and port number that we set in the application properties. Login using your correct login credentials. Next, we'll proceed with adding the application properties for the Zookeeper cluster. You can find this information on the Martini docs under Setup and Administration. Make sure you add the correct IP and Zookeeper client port on each server. Press save, then reload. Make sure that you also do this with the other Zookeeper servers in the cluster. Initially, you will see a message in the Martini logs which states that this node has become the leader. Any non-replicated endpoints will now be started. You can access the admin dashboard here, as well as view the different metrics for the Martini runtime. If the current Zookeeper leader is down, the cluster will elect a new leader from the remaining nodes. So let's go ahead and try that by terminating the current leader in the cluster. Then let's check whether the cluster elected a new leader. This node is follower. And there you have it. This node has now become the new leader for the cluster. We can also monitor their status in Prometheus, which can be accessed using the IP address and port 9090 of the node where Prometheus is installed. As you can see in the Prometheus dashboard, the previous leader of the node, which ends in 113, is still being reported as up, but if we hit refresh, the status will now change to down because we intentionally terminated the server. Lastly, load balancing is invoked with a probabilistic algorithm. We allow a client to update the connection string by providing a new comma-separated list of host port pairs, each corresponding to a Zookeeper server. The function may cause the client to disconnect from its current host with the goal to achieve an unexpected uniform number of connections per server in the cluster. In case the current host to which the client is connected is not in the cluster, this call will always cause the connection to be dropped and taken up by the remaining servers in the cluster. Otherwise, the decision is based on whether the number of servers has increased or decreased and by how much. And there you have it. Now we've learned on how to configure the Zookeeper cluster, set up a monitoring tool, and connect Martini in a clustered setup.